Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little more time on. Today, we're going to talk about hosting. What does it take to host? What do you have to think about? And ways to kind of get ready and train yourself to do that if you're interested in that sort of thing. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about crafty. I just have to tell you that. I think it's going to be funny. We've been testing how far we can go. We've talked about power. Talk about gaff tape for an hour, I think. And someone said, I think we can talk about crafty or craft services for an hour, and we're going to try. So anyway, it should be a good hour. That's coming up. If you want to see more about what we do, you can check out the schedule at officehours.global. And now we are going to jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one this morning, Alex, comes from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel. And he says, how would you prioritize purchases for an office hours quality Zoom room? Example, he wants to talk about lights, camera, audio, and backgrounds.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I would, as well as the things listed there in the question, I would say don't forget internet or wired. Your networking layer should come first. Wired, decent, solid wired internet. And in terms of the question, wasn't sure whether it was relating to specifically a room used for Zoom or an instance of Zoom Rooms, the product. But either way, if you're looking to professionalize your Zoom setup, make sure you're using a paid version of the product. And if you want the best results, then try and get the 720 and even the 1080. An instance of Zoom Room, a Zoom Room is actually a good way to get 720 if you want a kind of way to do that.
Kenneth?
Well, this is a bottomless pit now, don't you, Mitchell? So here's the listing, right? Everybody everywhere. It's internet, audio, lighting, camera, background, in that order. It doesn't matter how good your camera is if you can't stay connected to the world. So do that. And when you have your Zoom connection, just send them a note to ask them for the 720. I know it says you have it on your control panel, but you don't unless you ask them for it. And the webpage says don't ask, but ask them anyway, and they'll give it to you.
Mitchell?
Yeah, if you go through support, you can get your 720, by the way. But I'm just talking about the basic stuff, and maybe ultimately we should work into the possibility of a reference system, an office hours reference system. Mm-hmm. But I always start with audio because it's the one thing that always gets screwed up or really shows off how bad their connection is. So I'll just say audio at the top, everything else.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, internet at the top, and then camera, and then audio, and then lighting. They're all important, but that's the order I'd put them in.
Yeah, we've prepped over 5,000 people, and we've kind of fallen into when we go through our checklist. And I think we're going to get Shannon on in a couple of weeks to talk about it a little bit. But internet hardline, internet, or at least really strong Wi-Fi, but generally hardline. So we literally just sent somebody a 100-foot cable. They're like, well, it's 100. The router's 100 feet away. I was like, okay, just give us your address and we'll send you a cable to connect that. So Ethernet is usually the first thing that we try to solve. Then audio, as said before, it's because it's super important. It's the number one thing. Audio is 80% of a virtual meeting. So then lighting, because good lighting will fix the camera. A lot of cameras aren't very good at low light, but if they have a lot of light, they tend to look pretty good, even if they're cheaper. And then the camera, and then the background. Like that's generally how we approach that. Next question.
Comes from Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He says, this one's a little complicated, so I'm going to take my time with it. How can I quantify how much zoom I'm going to lose moving from 30x to 20x? And he gives an example, the Sony CX250 to an AX53. His use case is sports. He wants to do an end zone camera, so zoom is important. The 4K cameras, he notes, have bigger sensors, but only seem to have 20x zoom capability, whilst the HD ones have 30x.
Go ahead, Bill.
So one of the things you have to deal with is that originally zoom was all about the lens and how much optical zoom you had. But early in the process of these cameras, they started doing digital zoom on top of whatever the physical zoom was. And in the early days especially, you had to be very careful with that because just blowing up the picture to give you, quote, more zoom, which cheap consumer camcorders did regularly. They would say 200x, but it was a digital 200x that looks horrible when you got the pixels blown up that big. So understand the difference between actual glass and a zoom lens and digital zoom, and try to stay with as much optical as you can. Also, the sensor size and the whole geometry of everything has something to do with how good a picture you end up with. So I'm going to leave it for others to go into those details.
Yeah, so I think that he's probably dealing with optical zoom here as far as the 30x or 20x as you change the. But what happens is as that sensor gets bigger, what that lens is sending it, assuming it's the similar lens, is going to be it depends on the size of the sensor. So if the sensor is like, for instance, a Super 35 sensor will have a multiplier to a full frame sensor of about, I think it's 1.6 or so. I always think 1.5 because it's easier for me to do the math. so anyway, so about and so the what happens there is that zoom, it's not that it's going more X, it's the same amount of magnification, but you can get closer in because the chip is smaller. So it is why a lot of times we go to smaller chips for like 2/3 of the chips. I don't really shoot with anything less than 2/3, but the over 75-foot throw, we tend to go to 2/3 because there are two reasons. One is we get a little further out, but the other thing is that it also affects your depth of field. And so as that sensor gets larger, your depth of field gets shorter. And what that means is if you're shooting Super 35 at a distance, you might get to a point where the front of the nose is in focus and the back of the nose is not. It gets very, very, very tight. So that's always a challenge as well. As far as the ones that are built in, I think that you're looking at some versions of this that have built-in sensors. It's they're figuring out all the optics, and generally they're putting as much as they possibly can. But otherwise, the best thing to do is to test cameras if you can. Most people have good return policies, and we use them. So we literally just order the cameras. We very carefully take them out of their boxes without damaging anything. We take them out to where we're going to shoot them. We make sure that they work, and that's why return policies exist. And sometimes it might cost you a little bit to return, but for a lot of larger companies with consumer cameras, you can return it for just the shipping. And so if you don't like it, and that's at some point you have to just start testing the cameras rather than trying to figure it out in your head. Next question.
Next one comes from Mitchell Hill again in Wilmington, Delaware. I have a suggestion for the Office Hours 2.0 lower third to keep it popping up and out, keep it from popping up and in and out so much. Set a flag on it so it does not repeat for a timed interval. Thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, my idea is that I was watching a lot of our YouTube programs, and it was getting kind of the point, at least, and again, I may be way behind a curve on what's been done, but seeing the lower third pop in and out with the name on it, sometimes it just got to the point where it was just constantly doing it, particularly when Alex was going back and forth with somebody. And I was thinking, wow, how often do you need a lower third to identify somebody you just saw or was just identified? So I was thinking, if you put a flag on the lower third saying, this is Alex, and now we're going to somebody else, and that's their first time, and now Alex says something coming back, we don't need to see another lower third at that point.
You'd actually be surprised at how people get aggravated. We do this a lot with the lower thirds. We used to think, we'll put it on at the front of a show, and then we'll put it on maybe in the middle of the show, and then we'll put it on at the end of the show. Oh my gosh, number one comment we get. Is the lower thirds aren't there. I don't know who I'm looking at because someone comes in the middle of the show and they don't understand what they're looking at, and or who that is.
Maybe
they can't
for
remember.
Maybe for each question.
I think that I think it's fine. I think that we just have to be careful of it bouncing, so that if it has to wait for a second or two before it puts it up. That's the real thing. Is that I think that, and we've talked about it. I don't know what the technical limitations are on our end, but we've talked about it waiting for a couple seconds before it puts it up, so that if you're just interjecting something, it doesn't strap you. But if it does, if you do that. So we're definitely working on that. But I get, when I do live events, and we don't put lower thirds up often, I get comments. Like it's a thing. Like people, because they just get used to it. And the reality is, if you watch a lot of news, you'll see those lower thirds coming up all the time. Like if you watch a Sunday morning show, not all the time, not as often as we do, but pretty often they tell you who you're looking at. So it's because people just they're used to them being there. And they're like, oh, who is that again? And they don't really keep it in their memory anymore because we use it so often. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Alex. The networks like MSNBC, CNN, they don't keep doing lower thirds as frequently as Office Hours. They'll pop it up initially, and then they'll take it away. They tend to be very scarce with their lower thirds.
If you look at the Sunday morning talk shows, not the news doesn't matter. Like what the thing that's the closest to us of what we're doing is the Sunday morning talk shows. I mean, that's kind of what this was modeled after. and you'll notice how often they put them up. It's not as often as we do, so we can definitely slow it down, but it's pretty often. Like it's every time we go to Chris Christie or every time we go to Donna Brazil or whatever, it shows you that who it is. Next question.
David Paskin up next from Miami, Florida here on the panel. Just got an email about Dante Studio. Is this new?
Go ahead, John.
It's got to be new. I just downloaded it. It looks like it's Windows only right now, and it looks like it's like the first step in what they're trying to get to looks like NDI type of a system here. So I'll play with this over the next couple of days.
Yeah. Let's and if someone knows someone at Audinate, we'd love to have them come on and talk about it. And a lot of us use Dante. We don't use the video sides of those, but we use a lot of it. So, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, would there still be a market niche for a dedicated render farm vendor, even in the age of the cloud?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, so the cloud is putting some pressure on that because distributed processing and getting higher performance by attaching machines together via the cloud is getting more and more possible every day. And of course, you've got those big render farms that are now commercial. Things like Amazon Web Services could be looked at as that. Then you've got the fact that this new integration of chips, and Apple has been kind of leading with this in terms of putting not only just huge scale integration. So you have multiple GPUs and multiple CPUs on the same piece of silicon, literally right next to each other with super high speed buses between them. Some of the things that render farms used to have to be created to do because each computer only had so much power is now consolidated in that. So those are three factors.
I probably disagree with the last one there because, I mean, the bottom line is we just keep scaling what we use. You can never have enough computers. Like we're working, eventually we're hoping to put it in a render farm, in our office, just using some of the spare machines because even now, even just with motion with the countdown clock that you see at the beginning, which, some people like and some people don't, that still took 6 hours to render, that countdown clock because I oversampled it and I did a bunch of other things. And so as you start to do those kinds of things, it can add up really quickly. So there's definitely a room for render farms. I think that the problem is that they've been around long enough that they've commoditized, which means that if you do it, you have to understand that there are some people out there that are doing these that really know what they're doing, and they're scraping it down, the costs down to the penny, and they understand what it takes to run these very efficiently. So I wouldn't. There's definitely a market for render farms, but that market is full of people who really know how to do it. So unless you're going to do something very disruptive, and I mean really know your stuff, there's no room in it. There's no air in there anymore to take advantage of it. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer, Viera, Florida. Can you recommend a good, inexpensive USB headset mic? Thanks.
Right. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, there are good ones and there are inexpensive ones. And I don't think those two words come together very often. The least expensive and decent thing is either by Polson or some other company. And these are under $20 USB capsules, electret capsules, I should say, terminating in a TS or TRS jack. It'll get the job done when you have to do it, but then you have to connect it to show and tell, something like this, which converts the little plug to a USB connection, and that's another $15 or so. And the real ones, I think, that are of consequence are made by companies where you can spend in the hundreds of dollars. There's not much in the less than 100, but more than 20 range, it seems.
Hey, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I like the Logitech gaming headsets. They're colorful. They got colored lights and they sound good. And every time I've gone on the air with one, I haven't gotten any complaints.
Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say that I also have a Polson and I use it with my Rode Go 2. And as long as I'm not far away from it, if I want something that's hands-free, it's wonderful. It will never reach the quality that a larger mic offers you.
Okay, go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, now USB headphone and microphone combinations are designed more for communications than they are for broadcast work. So the frequency response of the microphone is severely limited. Oftentimes it's noise canceling, and that is good in an office situation, but it also reduces the fidelity of your signal. I've had good results in that arena with the Jabra Evolve 20. And Monoprice has some interesting things for literally $14. They're not the best things under the face of the earth, but they do a decent job. They won't last forever, but they're $14. I have not had good results with Logitech. I've gone through 2 of their particular models, the HS40, and I'm very displeased with Logitech at the moment.
Yeah, I think that I'm surprised that someone hasn't really built a great mic that's like $100 that sounds really good, headset mic with a USB connection. Like that seems like a huge wide open gap in the market that we all kind of cobble things together. One thing might want to look at is just getting something that does the TRS, connection. So one of the ones that I'm starting to use is the Audio-Technica ATR 2X. It's a little bit better than the Tech Rise, which kind of messed with us because they is that it there, Kenneth? That's and you're happy with it. It's good interface.
Yeah, it works. It just sits there on the side and just does what it needs to do. It's got a volume control and a mute switch built into it with tally lights on it. Not bad. Yeah,
and the problem with the Sabrent USB to TRS is that it doesn't have enough gain. And the problem with the Tech Rise is they changed the way that they dealt with TRS and TS, and so it doesn't work unless we take it apart. So those are the things so this Audio-Technica seems to be built a little bit better, a little bit more expensive too. And then of course the Paulson and Piles are relatively good to make that work. So those are some things, but it does seem kind of like an amazing missing gap right now that we don't see someone just build something that you can just plug into your computer and have a headset. But I'm missing something. I just don't know what it is. All right, next question.
Next one comes from TJ Asher in Minneapolis. He says, why isn't Birding with Lois listed on the daily emails? It's one of the Office Hours 2.0 spin-offs. It's Thursday and today, and Birding with Lois's 3rd episode airs tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific time on YouTube, and he's got a link there to make it convenient for everyone.
I have a highly technical reason that Lois, Birding with Lois, has not been put into the list. It's because someone hasn't sent me a paragraph of what needs to be put into the email. So like literally the ones that are down below that are at the bottom of community events. So someone typed something up that gave me a title, when it is, and what it is, and I cut and paste it in. And you got to I will cut and paste it in. So don't proofread it. People say you had an error in one of the whatevers, and I'm like, I don't know. Someone just gave it to me. I put it in there. So that's the reason that so the reason it's not there is that if someone doesn't build something for me, it tends to I just tend not to get to it. Those are the sections that I just wait for someone to send me. And for a long time, Birding with Lois wasn't. It was all in rehearsal. It wasn't. I think last week was the first one. So go ahead, Bill.
On this general topic, I want to give a tip of the hat to the lowly press release that those of us who worked in media for decades used to send out in a blast. Anytime you're doing a news show or something like that, there was a little kind of a format, and you sent out an email or something like that, and it had its own little creative things. I mean, you'd start with who, what, when, where, and then you'd talk about what you're going to do. And there was a little even code at the bottom, -30- that says, I'm done. That's all there is. There's not a second page. Those things have kind of fallen off the world, but I can't tell you how many times I sent out a silly press release and I got a ping back from a news department saying, we're interested. So
I get 5 to 10 a day.
Yeah.
So as someone in the press, I get 5 to 10 emails a day that are some new product that's being released. And about once a day, I go, hey, I'd like to bring those guys on Office Hours, or I'd like to get can you send me an NFR? Can you send me a demo? Can I have someone to talk to about it? So it's about once a day. I respond to something, but it's 1 out of every 10, that I respond to. So but it's definitely valuable. The key is, for a long time, the big thing is I used to write those as well, and I used to use them when they came to me. And the key is to write it as if it was an article. Like the mistake people make is they get flourishy and they get whatever. The press release has to be written as an article, because that way magazines, we used to be very careful about how we wrote them, because magazines will just cut and paste it and put it into their magazine. Like they're just trying to fill pages. They've got ads, and on the other side of the ad, they need content. So if you send them the content, they'll just put it in. Like they're just like, okay, that's something I don't have to write. And you'd be surprised at how much just goes out. And we would package. The other thing we would do is build full on packages for TV news networks, and then we'd also, what we would do is we'd have the press release, then we'd have the packages that are like literally you can take this 5.5 minute package and just throw it into your news thing, and it'll just click in there and it'll look like news. Like there's no person talking, there's an overview of it or whatever. And we'd also give it to you, and you can have it with or without audio. So you could just throw it in there and then talk over it. And then we would also give you all the clips all broken out with leader, so that you could put together whatever you want. And you'd be surprised at how, I mean, press is just this giant machine that's trying to fill time against ads. Like, you just have to remember, that's the thing you always have to remember, is that sure, they're doing some investigative reporting and everything else, but like 30%, 40% of their content is like, how do I have enough content to not have it be all ads? So you just give them the tools that they need and make it easy, and they'll just throw them in there. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, the easier you make it for the end user, usually a TV station, radio station, whatever, the more likely it's going to get used. And as Alex said, if you break it out so it's easy for them to drop it into their local newscast, including the sound bites and maybe a script that suggests what they should do, they're more likely to use it because they're chasing deadlines. You never know what's going on there.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially when it's something that's relatively evergreen, they'll throw it in there. You'll send it to them on a Monday, and then like 3 weeks later, suddenly it just shows up in the newscast, because it's just, we don't have something there. There's a this doesn't happen in the nightly news, but the funniest thing that I saw when I was sitting in the back of the studio, the control room for ABC nightly news, and there's 20 people packed into this control room. This is a couple of years ago, and the funny thing is there's 2 people who are only managing time. So they're trying to figure out when as these segments come in, because this is the first time a lot of them have seen them all together. They're figuring out, we're 30 seconds light, we're 42 seconds heavy, and they're trying to figure out, what do we cut out, what do we put back in, what do we, so during the show they're sitting there, there's 2 people trying to figure out what are they going to add, and it's like, we're going to add another like if you're 40 seconds light or something like that, we'll add a PSA, and that will only be 10, because they're trying to hit it like when it comes in. The show starts at a very specific time, and they have to end at a specific time. Now, when you get out of the United States, they don't bother. That's why the BBC always has those temperatures at the end. The temperatures at the end of the hour are all just to fill the time. They're always like, if they're 60 seconds light or 45 seconds light, they don't try to figure out what to do. They just put up the screensaver until they get to the top of the hour, which I think is much more sane. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Douglas says, what's the most effective way to learn to design sounds on a synth? I just got a Novation Peak and can't seem to break out of building simple percussive sounds, while preset packs abound with dense and thick sounds.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I've used a lot of synthesizers over the years, the Moog, the ARP X, the Synclavier. I'm not a musician, and I don't know how to play a keyboard, but the way I learned that you can make great sounds is by accident, playing with it and adjusting all the modulations and effectors. There's a Novation Peak, which is pretty cool. All of those things will create a situation. If you're specifically doing sound design for something, I always like to start with an organic sound and then modify it in some way. And you can layer on all kinds of intonations that weren't there to make it sound otherworldly, but yet familiar.
Go, Jeffrey.
Just like everything else, it's all about the fundamentals that are behind it. And there are fundamentals to synth building. You start with a pitch. You work on your envelopes. You figure out what type of waves you're going to do, whether you're going to do a sawtooth or a sine wave or anything like that. How that sound's going to bend, how that EQ is going to be set up on that, and of course how many layers you're going to put onto that. Once you start mastering those things, then it's really just an experimental process from there.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Sarah Doyle in Falls Church, Virginia. And Sarah says, does anyone have a favorite VR headset? I'm trying to spec out a test bench for some upcoming projects.
So you should definitely have an Oculus Quest. I mean, that's the leader in the business right now. And so the Quest 2 or whatever is the one that you want to have. Then you might want an Oculus as well, the wired version of it, just because it has more horsepower. It's going to be based on your PC. While you do that, you want to get an HTC headset. They have a lot of different apps and they operate slightly differently. I've oftentimes had both of those with their receivers just next to each other in a given volume to do those tests. But those are I don't know if there's really any other ones you really need to do testing other than unless you're just trying to see what other people do with headsets. But as far as testing whether something works in VR, currently I would say that the Oculus and the HTCs are the market leaders. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jeff Vreeland in Indianapolis, Indiana. He says, what advanced settings do you all use for Zoom video within the Zoom interface?
Go ahead, David.
Let me just be clear. I'm answering this mostly so people can tell me that I'm doing it wrong. But this is, so these are my settings. I have, I always want to see display participant's name. Forgive me. I want to make sure stop my video is not turned on. I do not want to see that video preview every time I join a meeting. I don't want to see non-video participants. And I don't want to see myself as the active speaker. I'm tired of looking at myself. I always want to make sure I've got 49 participants. And then I also always turn on optimized video quality with denoise and use hardware acceleration for receiving video.
And you have 49 participants? I do 49.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
49.
No, absolutely. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I think there's a subtlety difference on the where those options are on Mac versus PC in Zoom. I think there's an advanced button there, or you get different options on either one of the platforms. But generally, I found for the advanced video settings like the hardware acceleration stuff, all those rendering methods, I found that auto's always been fine unless you're trying to troubleshoot something. And even then, trying to use those settings to troubleshoot something, I haven't really ever found that that's led to identifying a problem, but it's just a way of changing those variables. I think it really mainly applies when you're messing around with the GPU, trying to get your hardware acceleration or your handoff working.
I never saw the enable the stop incoming video, which I don't know what that, I don't know what it does. I turned it on. Glad nothing happened bad. But I was like, what is that? I still don't know what it is. So that's a feature I haven't seen before. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, I'm starting with CodeWithChris to learn iOS development, and I currently have an iPhone 6S Plus. Would it be worth it to upgrade to an iPhone 13 to be able to access and learn about the latest iOS features?
I don't think you need to invest in a 13, but I think that you should get a more modern phone. So, something like the 12 will have LiDAR, so that might give you some, a used 12 might get you might have some more fun with it. But I don't think that the 6S is too old to development for. But I would strongly consider something newer, 11 or higher, and even the SE. But the advantage of getting like a used 12 would be that it would have LiDAR in it, and so some of the object capture tools would be available to you that may not be available in earlier versions. Next question.
Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, guys. Does an Ethernet-based switcher exist? And if so, what would be the pros and cons of one?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I wasn't sure exactly how to pass this question, whether it's relating to a video switcher or an Ethernet switch. My take on it was whether a switch to switch an Ethernet feed from A to B exists. I have used such a thing. It's literally like a manual changeover switch that will change a feed to two sources, one of two sources for Ethernet networks. So it really is like an RJ45 changeover switch from A to B. If that's what the question relates to, you have to be careful because changing over a device or a computer or a router so quickly between one network to another could be problematic. I personally used it for an on and off position. So my A leg was the feed and the B position was nowhere. So it was like an on off for my Ethernet network to provide an air gap.
Yep. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
If it's a video-based switcher, then you have some pretty high-end stuff. Like I know Grass Valley has something that does IP-based switching. Other than that, it's the closest I can think of that you could get to that's fairly inexpensive, of course, is NDI, which there's no hardware technically. It's all software-based for switching like that. But I don't think there's anything because I was racking my brain to think of how you would do that. Other than that, there's just basically HDMI to Ethernet and back. Yeah,
I mean the two things that you're looking at are the most popular codecs for this are the 2110, which is the high end version. That's what the Kula uses. I believe it's the Kula from Grass Valley uses. And then there is NDI, which of course is a TriCaster, is got NDI in it, and any of these computers that can any of these software based vMix on a laptop or a computer, all of those will do what you need to do as far as an Ethernet. The pros and cons really are that NDI can be a little, it just jumps all over the network if you don't really know what you're doing. So if you start plugging it in, you'll suddenly see everything. But whether it does what it's supposed to do and how it manages it, unless you really are technical and understand how to manage it, it can take over your network or do things that you don't expect it to. And it can, drop out and do odd things as well. So you do have to know what you're doing. You can get started easily and then you get good at it and it'll work well. But in between, as you start to grow, you may end up with a lot of idiosyncrasies. The advantage, of course, is that it's really easy. So you can run Ethernet to a lot of things. The other thing we're waiting to look for is that Blackmagic has released cameras that have Ethernet coming out of them, but no switcher that takes the Ethernet back in. So we might want to wait until the end of next week to see if a switcher appears that might only need the Ethernet connection to connect to those cameras. Next question.
Next one comes from David Paskin, Miami, Florida. We've built a community here at Office Hours and are able to communicate with that community via email. When might it be valuable to post Office Hours info on social media to grow the community if we aren't doing that already?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
When I first joined, it was very confusing to me initially. That why is there a Mukana? Why is there a Discord? Why is there After Hours? And now that I've been doing it for almost a year, it makes total sense, especially for us internally to get things done. I don't really use email that much. I'm like, I want to push the button and talk to people or communicate with them. So if we're thinking about expanding it beyond to the viewers, people watching right now, they have many ways that they can interface with us, like asking questions, going on After Hours. I mean, the culture and the environment exist right here. To do all of those things without resorting to email and Facebook and all those, usual suspects.
We still use email, and we send those out. There's actually an email list that I don't use very often, which is I refer to the big list that you'll see every once in a while. You'll get a separate email from that list. But that's like, I think it's nearing 10,000 people on it. And then and that's all the people that go to officehours.global. Like they just sign up and say, and they get a little invite to do something. But if I want to push something, we'll. So you'll probably see us start to add. Well, we should have we have YouTube, of course, and then Twitter is probably next, and then we're looking at Facebook and LinkedIn. Those will probably all roll out in May. So we're getting ready to, we'll probably do some coverage of WWDC the same way we did last year. And what I'd like to do is have all those things in place before that happens. And so we're gonna kind of build that up, and then we may get promoted on another site if we cover dub. So anyway, I think that we're going to go down that path. It's the reason that we haven't done it up until now is that I really, and sometimes I can simmer on things too much, but I like to simmer. Like as you simmer stuff, you increase the density. You keep on making it, and I think that it's time for us to start breaking out a little bit. We are actively getting ready to do a lot more publicly over the summer. And the goal, and I don't know if the goal is by September to really have the satellite uplinks working. So that's I'm just socializing the idea of what it'll cost to do that. If in case you're wondering, it's depending on the term that we use, it's 1.2 to 1.4 million, which seems like a lot of money. That's per year to have 24/7 office hours on satellite. And that would cover about 70 to 80% of the population in the world. Like that they could, and you may say, why you put it on satellite? Well, if you put it on a free to air, radio stations will pull it down, television stations will pull it down, especially in places where we're in the middle of the night. You can imagine Indian television stations just putting it on because there's nothing else to put on at 2:00 in the morning or whatever that is. So those are the kind of things that we want to make this stuff available. It has already made a difference in some interesting places because people are watching what we're doing. And so we're definitely want to get the word out, but I wanted to make sure, and if you look at where we are now compared to we were even 6 months ago, the quality level is. I just had a friend of mine who works at a pretty big organization just look at it, and he's just like, I can't believe how I've never seen anything. Not seen that kind of quality in an online event that happens every day before. So I think that we wanted to get to a point where we put our best foot forward. You'll find that I don't like to show my notes. I was the kid who put all my chemistry things and I just said, just put the answers. Like, here are the answers. No, and some of that was I didn't want to show my notes. Some of it I was just doing it all in my head. Next question.
Next one comes from David Paskin again in Miami. Building off my last question, what do you see as the future of event communications and publicity? Email, social, post, something else?
Constant contact, like what we're doing here. So I think that we can send out the emails, but the main thing is that I think that the future is something happening every week, every day, every month, not things that are a one big event, and you start to build a culture of people who know how to use it, how to work with it. You start to build those communities around that kind of constant. And obviously we're the epitome of constant because we're doing something all day, every day. But I think that that's what a lot of people miss is they're like, we're going to do something once a year or twice a year or 3 times a year. And now there's a whole bunch of problems with that. One is that you're going to usually you'll use a new platform every single time. If you do it once a year, like we work with conventions all the time and conferences and they have some new idea this year that they didn't have last year. But that also means that your users all have to learn something new again, and then they only get to do that for a day or 2 or 3 or 4 days. And then it's gone, and so by the time they start to figure it out, it's gone and they're not using it. And that's why people don't use a lot of the apps. And I think that, but I do think that finding ways to build communities that you have a real connection to is the future. It's actually, yeah, that's all I can say right now. but I think that people, being able to contact people and being in contact with them. The other thing that I think is important within those communities, and we do this by creating we create a lot of resistance to joining, and we make that hard on purpose. And what that does is it builds a tighter community because the people who get through the filter's designed to filter out a lot of different things, and everything from people who are problematic to people who are not serious about what they do. So being able to build what I would call what I refer to as an intentional community. Like we're here because we're interested in something specific. We're here with an intentional set of rules of how we want to interact. We don't have that in most of our lives. We weren't born into an intentional community. We didn't grow up in one. We didn't even buy a house typically in one. It's kind of, we wanted some little piece of this, but it's not intentional. We have the opportunity to build these communities around things that we are intentionally interested in, and then figuring out how to culture that and take care of it. And it's really, I think that the hardest part with any community is maintaining it. Maintaining the community is a tricky thing. And there's always a temptation to want to go fast. And it can, there's a saying that, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. And so you just have to be very careful about how what you do next, to make that work. And because it can fall apart in days, and I've done that in the past. So you just have to be very, very careful about how you step forward. And by doing it all the time, you can iterate. And we've iterated. I mean, you go back, to 2020 and look at what the show looks like, and it's different. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, it's hard to follow up when the boss gives a presentation like that. So I'll just add a couple of things here. The phrase is top of mind. So you have to do something that's worth doing. Do it all the time so that it's always there, and you eventually do rise to top of mind, as this program has done.
Go ahead, David.
Intentional community is very counter cultural in many ways, right? It's all about, in YouTube and Facebook and social, it's all about eyeballs. It's all about likes. It's all about, and I think that what you're describing, Alex, is a real shift, a cultural shift of how do we make sure that what we're promoting or what we're creating has the longevity and the value that we hope all of everything that we create has.
I'll argue that it's a grown-up network. the current social networks are the adolescence of what we were doing, and that at some point we realized that those are really problematic. They're problematic for society. They're problematic individually. They just having lots and lots of people isn't as important. And it's not necessarily a new idea in the sense that we find, with many somewhat closed societies, they find that they're very, very useful when they're a little harder to get into, and so that they, and China is, there's a lot of social communities right now. I've been tracking a lot of this, and there's a social community in China. I can't think of the name of it right now. That it's like, there's like 100-page questionnaire that you have to fill out to get in. Like literally it is like that, just this incredible cliff that you have to climb to get in. But the power of that community is way higher than almost anything else out there. That's the big thing, is that if you can figure out a way to build an intentional community, and I will argue that if you figured out a way to propagate lots of intentional communities and gave them the tools to do that, people's patience with the current social media and traditional media would become very short because it's very addicting. It's very addicting to, like, I've talked about it when we started After Hours. I listen to NPR almost every day since I was 12, probably 12 or 13 years old. And when we started After Hours, I barely listened to any of it because if I have time to listen to something, I just sneak into After Hours without my camera on and listen to people talking, or listen to silence, and then people pop something up and I can jump in and talk about something or whatever it is. But that's the power of the next generation of community, and we're figuring it out. But that's also why we're trying to do it in public and talk about why we're doing it, so that other people can do the same thing. Because I think that I know this will sound audacious, but figuring this out changes the world. Like we just have, there's a lot of chaos that is being created right now through what I can go on a tirade, but I'm not going to do it on YouTube. All right, next question.
David Brady in New York City is up next. He says, are there any good, free or inexpensive vector editing applications the panel likes? I think Pixelmator Pro has a vector mode, but he's looking for others. Thanks.
Yeah, Affinity has some good tools, and I think it's Affinity Designer is the one that I use a lot for that type of thing. I've been trying to I have Photoshop and I have After Effects. I've been trying not to buy the whole suite or rent the whole suite from Adobe, because it's just a big cash outlay to do that. So Illustrator would be it's obviously the one that I'm most used to. I have to admit that I found Illustrator to be more and more problematic to use from my perspective for what I need it for, which is limited after version 6. So version 6 to me was the pinnacle of Illustrator as a person who just needs to build outlines and build those stuff out. So there hasn't been almost any features after that I cared about. So it just more complexity, and I still can't figure out how the Pathfinder tools work compared to the way that they should have worked. Anyway, so so I find that I'm still dealing with learning something Illustrator I had used for 15 years or I've used since 1992 to some degree, so I'm still learning how to do things in Designer, but I feel like Designer does all the things I need. I just designed a logo on it. It does all the things. I just don't know where they are. And I'm doing the same thing with Affinity Photo. So if I see something, I try to do it in Affinity, and sometimes time means I just go to Photoshop and do it because I can do it really fast in Photoshop. And Affinity, I'm still learning where those tools are, and they don't have alpha channels. I don't understand that. But anyway, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to step in and defend our friends at Adobe a little bit. I use Illustrator because I like the way that it integrates with the other Adobe products. So if you're not using Photoshop and Premiere and all the other programs, it doesn't make as much sense. I agree with you, Alex, but the fact that you can round trip things so much easier within each program and utilize Illustrator for what it does the best and Photoshop for what it does the best. I love that in After Effects I can get into Premiere, but I'm getting off subject. But I'm just saying that's a good point for using Illustrator, as it works with other stuff.
I agree. No, I completely agree with you that Illustrator. The big reason to use Adobe products is because you can use them all together, and they pass data back and forth really effectively. So that you're absolutely correct that is the case. The issue is that Adobe has built, because of the way that they're because of their subscription service, they're building this huge cottage industry of other companies that people are trying to figure out how to use because they don't want to do those monthly payments. And if they cut those payments by 60%, probably no one would think about it again. They'd be happy with it. It's just that they're too much for an individual. And I think that Adobe is putting itself in it's maybe it'll be fine. Subscription services are pretty safe. You've got lots of professionals that are doing what they're doing, but all these companies are making money underneath it. And, if you let a lot of brush grow, eventually a bunch of trees grow behind it. So they're, they've created what made Adobe a standard was that Photoshop shipped with every scanner. When I was, you never bought Photoshop when I was, 22, 23 years old. You just bought scanners, came with a full copy of Photoshop, and then one scanner supplied 10 people with the Photoshop license, as long as you had the serial number. So I think that I think Adobe's fine right now, but I think that their long-term trajectory is complicated, and I think that's the hard part. for them, and I think they'll keep acquiring themselves. I think they're going to probably be fine for 10 years at least, if not more. But I think that they're building up this huge ecosystem around them of other companies because a lot of people just aren't ready to pay that much money per month. Next question.
Comes from the seventh scroll in Brooklyn, New York. How many different network switches would you safely add to your system flow before you felt it became problematic?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I wouldn't say there's a finite number, but the more you add, the more challenging it can be, definitely, and it can get problematic. But if it's done right, you can push it higher than in an unmanaged environment. The biggest problem I see is when people add switches after switches after switches in a kind of chaotic, uncontrolled way. Is one, you end up with bottlenecks all over the place, and you almost always end up with a network loop somewhere. Somebody plugs something into something because there was a switch somewhere, and you end up with a crippled network. And so how these things actually perform can also depend on how much demand and load you've actually got on your network. If you're really trying to push it, these problems will surface sooner than later. But if you're using a fully managed system with a unified management console like Unify or Meraki, then one's confidence and ability to add more and actually see what's going on is far greater.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, definitely. The con is that once you put a switch into a port, you're not really separating in half. So 1 gig becomes 500, but the more you plug into that secondary switch, the more it's going to go into that port. And as Rupert said, a bottleneck. The pro to this is if you plug in a switch, you're also plugging in making a replicator. So with the power in there, it's pushing the data a little bit better through your lines, so you can get to where your ultimate goal goes. But a lot of home networks, at best they get up to 1 gig on the internet anyway. So the ultimate bottleneck is the router or the main modem itself.
Unless they're trying to go between pieces, things in the network, and you're always slowed down to lowest common denominator. So that's kind of what Rupert was pointing to, is that you can have one switch in the middle that is 1 gig and everything else 10 gig, and everything's going to be 1 gig. so it's a next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. Could you see Blackmagic Design adding 4K HDMI output to their Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras?
Nope. That ship has sailed. I mean, when they put that hardware in, when they put it together, they're not going to be able to upgrade that to 4K. I mean, that's what I see. I don't see a future where that would make sense for them. They would just sell us a different computer. Next question.
Next question comes from Craig McFarland in Boston. I'm surrounded by screens that can light me up depending on what content we're looking at. What ways do you use to limit impact?
I'll go, David.
It was a few months ago that Alex was talking about this, and I think said something to the effect that any website that doesn't have a dark mode is obnoxious. So I immediately went to all of my websites and made them all dark. But the one thing I'll say is that I found that for those websites that don't have a dark mode, some of the plugins that you can throw on Chrome really can mess up some of the other websites. So I don't have a good solution other than dark mode.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, you don't want to go nuts. You don't want it to start look like a solar farm and you're concentrating all this light on one spot. Mm-hmm. Adjust your monitors so they aren't all blasting you as the subject.
Go, Jeffrey.
The farther away the monitor, the better. If you can raise it up and tilt it down, just like with a regular panel light, it'll get out of your direct glare. That'll help you on there. And of course, if you got multiple monitors, designate one as your web monitor, designate the others as your production monitors, and then you can adjust and keep the colors and the brightness to whatever you need to on those other monitors. And then if you have to go to a web page that's super bright, at least you can have it out of the way so it's not glaring in your face.
Go ahead, Bill.
And lighting is always about a balance of all the sources that are hitting you. If your room is relatively light, has a lot of light coming in from exterior windows, something like that, adding another light on or a screen will not show up as much. If you're trying to do a low-key look, like a lot of us have, where we're controlling the background so we can get color in it, then another source from a iPad or laptop will be present in that, because generally everything is set up for that.
Yeah, as Bill said, it's a ratio. So if you have big key lights, you're not going to see anything from the screens. If you have very low lights, you're definitely going to see them because they're just a higher percentage of the light available going onto your face. Go ahead, Rupert.
Exactly. I have my screens down basically quite low, and my lights are big and quite bright.
Yeah, absolutely. And then yeah, by the way, there's other reasons to not have a lot of light websites is because it's actually not good for your eyes. People are starting to figure out that really bright screens, especially on your phone. I mean, one of the reasons they're doing that is there's a couple reasons for the phone to go dark. One is it's much better for your eyes, and number two is that it is much better for the battery. So it literally makes a difference that that dark mode is better for all energy saving and so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of reasons to go dark, and hopefully people will follow the suit of many websites that are slowly getting darker, so that we can all view what we're doing a little bit better. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, what's a productive schedule for studying a program like CodeWithChris? 10 hours a day, X number of hours a day, X number of chapters, or something in between?
If I really wanted to get good, I would spend probably 3 to 4 hours a day on it. I mean, if I didn't have a job, or if I had a short enough job. I have more than a full-time job, and then I have this thing called office hours. So it keeps me pretty busy. So, but if I was going to do it, I don't think that I would do it any faster than that. I think there's a temptation to like pack in lots of hours, but I would find that 3 or 4 hours as you're starting, because it takes mental, and I would take breaks. I would spread that out. I'd do an hour, do a little walking, think about what you just did, do some studying. Now, one of the things that I do, that I was starting with CodeWithChris, and this is what I do with everything when I do training or I'm trying to learn something, is as I work on it, I write things down. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. Why am I doing this? Why? Because the code, even with something like CodeWithChris, he's not going to explain everything that you're doing. So what I do is I write those down while I'm working. Like, I don't understand why this class of code is necessary. I don't understand what this means. And I just write those down. I don't try to answer them right then. I just write them down, just keep moving and just keep following along. When I finish, I go Googling. So I just start Googling, like, what is that and why is that? Because now I have a hook in my brain for that information. And I tend not to watch anything in long bits and pieces. Like right now I'm doing a Resolve project, and I am, all of it is just me just Googling. I have Google open on one and talking to Charles. And so I'm talking to Charles, and then also I have Google open on one computer, and I'm just constantly Googling. I don't know where this button is. I don't know why this is. How do I manage this? How do I put this in? How do I add a folder of LUTs? How do I do that? But then what happens is that I very quickly assimilate that information because I needed it, and I will use it, and it'll become part of me, as opposed to like reading a book about it or watching a long video. So that's the key. That's what I would think about. Next question.
Andre Dolly in Berlin says, how important is quality of service in a streaming setup with an own router, and what are the right settings?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I don't know if we'll be able to tell you the right settings, but quality of service, yeah, very, very important. The main thing is when you're streaming out, how is that stream going to be perceived on the other end? Will you be able to successfully, consistently send out whatever you're going to send out? And if you're going to send it out to YouTube, you can send it out to RTMP, send it out to 2-3 different sources and things like that. How is that going to saturate on the network when it comes in? What are you using on your network that could inhibit that signal from going out? Are you using things like Dante or NDI that's saturating the network from there? So it's all about control at that point. So quality of surface, you definitely, if you're really going to be network, lots of network in here, you might want to have 2 different networks, one that's doing things that's going into your system, and then that main one that's just doing nothing but sending it to where you need it to go.
Next question.
Elliot Robinson in Las Vegas wonders if there's a Bible on AV troubleshooting. Are there any AI or expert systems for diagnosis like those that exist in the automotive world?
Go ahead, Bill.
I haven't heard of anything AI in there. Most of us learned troubleshooting in the early days, and it really has to do with almost thinking algorithmically, which is a step-by-step process. Most of us, I think, understand where our original signal is coming from. And if we were involved in putting the system together, we understand that this connects to that, to this, to that. Each thing has its own function along the chain until you get the output that you want. So when we troubleshoot, we tend to know, okay, that can't be at the source because I know the source is correct because it's hitting a monitor 3 steps down. The problem must be beyond that. So we really do think kind of just algorithmically in terms of diagnosing and fixing problems.
Yeah. There's a couple tools that we use. I mean, scopes is a big one. So audio scopes and video scopes are pretty key to making those things work, because we can see what's actually happening. I thought I had this little, I have this, there's an audio one that just generates and sees signals, but, like you can just generate signals. So being able to generate tone, being able to generate, all of the, you can generate tone, you can generate a variety of different pink noise or white noise, those kinds of things for us to figure out so that we can look at it and look at what's happening over the spectrum. For video, one of the things that we use is what's called a pathological SDI test signal. This signal looks like pink on the top and gray on the bottom, and it is the hardest thing to run through an SDI system. And so when you run it through, if there's a problem, you're going to see it. So usually that comes through with some kind of tone, and it is it's very hard to process for tools. But a lot of it, again, comes down to running it for a long time, running things for a long time, running tests. The closer you can get to a real world test, you saw some of the concerts we're doing is because I'm getting ready to do real concerts out of that stage, and I need to thrash it. We just call it thrashing. The closer I can get to real world experiences, the better. And so you want to try to get you constantly be pushing those things and getting test units. When we do a rehearsal, I'm doing a rehearsal tomorrow for a show. We bring in actors so that they are the same number of people that we're going to use for the show and let them talk back and forth. There's nothing that will replace getting close to the real world for a lot of these things. Go ahead, Kenneth.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that fit into the Bible here. First off is whether you're choosing audio or video, start with a stable source. If it doesn't come out right at the other end, cut the chain in half and see how things are there. That will be probably the easiest way to arrive at the faulty component. Change one thing at a time and take notes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I don't have one on the video side, but growing up in the audio side, I always went to my Bible was Yamaha put out this thing called the Sound Reinforcement Handbook by Gary Davis, and I think it's in its, I don't know which version it's in, but it's now a collaboration between a couple of different people, and I'd have that book in every show that I'd go to, and if I was doing sound, I'd have that book to help me figure out how I need to adjust things on the audio side.
My great uncle gave me that when I was, I think, 12. Like that book, I still have it, yellow with the black on it, or some kind of like off. Yeah. Anyway, next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, says, for info screens in breakout rooms, what's your go-to? Screen share seems like a bad idea.
Yeah. So one of the things we do, so this is a mixture of the info as well as doing like cart, which is basically putting the text up. So you can have essentially subtitles on a screen. And so to do both of those things, we use Google makes some little Chromecasts. So we do Chromecasts and we set them to a page. And what's cool is every room can have its own page, or they can all have the same page, or they can do whatever they want. So like, for instance, for the cart, we just push those into the back of the monitors, and basically we know what room those belong to, and they all are looking at the right page that they need there. And then we're able to basically send things out on a web page to those things. And that has worked. We use stream text is what we use for cart, but you can also use them for announcements and for all kinds of other things. So that's the one that we use the most. Other ones for some events that I work on, we can't use a Chromecast, so we use Apple TVs. So Apple TV is a great thing that can Velcro to the back of the computer, or sometimes they're all stacked in one place, and we run them out. We go HDMI to fiber and then back to HDMI and put them into everything. So that way they're all in one place, but it usually doesn't really matter. And it's easier on Chromecast because we tend to go to a web page. For the Apple TV solutions, we often build small apps to do that. Next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis says, I've been crazy busy at work and have not been able to attend Kenn Jordan's website classes and after hours. Is he offering any archived lessons for his classes?
I don't think he is, and I think maybe we should have put him into a separate room and recorded it, but I don't think he has any archived lessons. But I think that the best thing to do is to go in, and rather than trying to absorb it, and just go in and ask questions and find out where he's at. And I think that's the best way to approach that. Next question.
John, it looks like Frailer in Greenfield, Massachusetts says, Google Workspace offers all of their services for free for nonprofits. Does Office Hours have any plans for utilizing the services for documenting and sharing content such as the standard operating procedures?
Oh, we should. We just haven't gotten around to it. But yeah, we can absolutely. Now that we're nonprofit, I've been looking at a bunch of different things. I just haven't had time to execute it. So if someone looks at that and gives me a breakdown of what I need to do, one thing we got to apply for is I guess Amazon gives nonprofits like $2,000 of credits a year, which I could really use because I'm underwriting this right now. So so we're going to work on that, getting that worked out. And so there's a lot of those things, and it'd be great if we'll try to put together a team that figures out what we can do as a nonprofit. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, my budget for the year was pretty set and I had planned for a new Mac Pro laptop. Now I'm wondering if the Studio would be a better choice. Opinions on a $3,000 hard budget?
Go ahead, David.
With the exception of the Extreme, you can get the Pro, the Max, or the regular M1 on either of those machines. So for me, it comes down to, do you need this device to be portable? And what kind of I/O needs do you have? Because you'll get a lot more on the Studio.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
What I've been playing with is the ability to actually bring two different things. And that is, I have my 2017 MacBook Pro. I'm going to do this at NAB. And then I've got my Mac M1 Mini, which is going to sit there and I'm going to remote in and I'm going to do all my production on the M1. And then I can actually use the laptop for surfing or anything like that. I could actually connect up to multiple devices, multiple computers, and go back and forth if I needed to. But that's where I'm going. And of course, if you hook up an iPad to it, next thing you know, you got a high resolution touchscreen on your Mac.
Go ahead, Bill.
I try to be ruthlessly reasonable about this and ask myself, what's the delta between changing from what I'm using now to what I could get from this one? Sometimes there's a substantial delta. Sometimes new processors or new operating systems or something like that really does give a lot of extra value. And if you can take something that's regularly taking you an hour and get it done in 10 or 15 minutes, there's a compelling reason to throw money at that to get that efficiency. I find often, though, I'm looking at the rig that I have now, and even though I'm on the last generation of Intel MacBook Pros, it's fully configured, and I haven't run across anything that it can't do that I regularly need to do to get paid for. So really, I'm saying I just want it to get into the next generation, and I eventually will do that, and I consider these like 2 or 3 year machines, and then I want to fall over and update to whatever is the current best. But I'm holding off as long as I can, because as soon as I buy whatever the newest Mac Studio is, they're going to come out with a new one that's even better at almost the same price, and that's going to drive me crazy.
Yeah, so I have a $3,000. I just spent $3,000 on a Studio, and it is a Apple M1 Max with 64 gigs of RAM, and it cost me literally 29 something or other to buy it. That's why my Studio hasn't, that was part of my Studio budget here. So that got stalled again as I bought this. I'm really glad I did, because I opened up from the concert stuff that we were experimenting with the other last week. I tried to do it on a M1 Mac Mini with 16 gigs, and it will not run. Like it's 5.7K footage in Blackmagic RAW doing an Ultra HD thing, and it just will not play back. And it's just been so I spent a lot of time doing that. And the reason I did that was because for some reason, I will say that the Studio is having trouble talking to my promised RAID. So the RAID just stalled all the time. So I finally packaged everything up and moved it over and put it on the RAID or not the RAID, but the internal drive inside of my Studio. Works great. Like it's perfectly smooth. So one thing that I would say about that, though, is that the regret that I have is that I didn't get a bigger hard drive. Like the hard drives are screaming fast on these Studios. I usually have external storage, but I only put 1 terabyte on this one because I was like, I'll just use external storage. I really wish I had 8 gigs of storage, because then I could generally most of my projects aren't bigger than 8 gigs. And I just wish I could just drag something over, work on it, and then send it back out again, and it's mostly because these drives are screaming fast and built in. So that's the only regret. And I would have gone up over the 3,000 mark just to get more drive space. Next question.
John Filer, I think it is what it is. I'm looking at the pronunciation in Greenfield, Massachusetts. How do you join in after hours? I have clicked on the link inside the email every once in a while. It's never seemed to work for me. So usually I just give up and watch an old Office Hours.
You have to be registered. You have to be in. We require you to be logged into Zoom to get into after hours. And that's the number one reason people have trouble getting in through that link, is that they're not logged into Zoom. So, and that's just a security function that greatly reduces issues. Next question.
John M. Gerard in Berkeley, California says, just wanted to say that I like the lower third that's done by Twit TV better than on office hours.
Oh, he didn't say office hours. I believe he said
Oh, you
office.
want me to?
He said Office Gours. So anyways, I'm sure he meant office hours. Go ahead, John.
Looks like he had a lot of downvotes on that. So those lower thirds are part of the new tech TriCaster package. It's one of the ones you get when you buy the TriCaster, and they've got to be 15 years old, and that look is way dated now.
It's funny, John. You don't have the record, but it's close to the record of the most downvotes that we've ever had. I have the record. I don't know what question I asked, but mine was like -18, and I don't remember what the question was that I put out, but it was like it was very low. So I still hold the record for most downvotes, but you're getting pretty close. I think that's a subjective thing that we like them to be subtle. And not over the top. We just want to make sure you have the information without it getting, without going crazy. So yeah, we probably won't change ours towards Twit's look anytime soon. But it definitely works, for them. So, all right, we're now changing subjects to we'll start talking about hosting. Hosting is it's something I thought about it a lot because last week we were talking about hosting for a show and someone was like, oh, we need to find someone who really knows the subject matter. And I told them I can make anybody. The reason I put this in there is I was talking to him and I said, I can make anybody sound good, like that they know what they're talking about with notes and teleprompters and other things like that. I was like, but being a host takes 1,000 hours of practice. like I was just like, I just need you to know, like you can have, I don't care what the person knows to be the host. Like to, I mean, I'd like them to, it's a big advantage to have them have the technical skills to do what they need to do. And for instance, in this show, and we'll talk about this show, it's important for the host to have more technical because they're dancing in a way that you don't do in a lot of other show hosts and moderators. And it's definitely better when they know the subject matter, but they don't need to. I won't name names, but there's a very popular host on the East Coast that does lots of interviews, and that host, is known for it. I mean, this is what they're known to doing, is doing these great interviews with folks. What people don't really know, I was talking to one of the producers, and what they don't know is that host sits in front of a computer and there's producers just feeding them questions. They have a couple of their own questions that they ask, but there's a huge amount of it that's just being fed into them by a series of producers that all stop what they're doing. There's, I believe the last time I talked to them, there's like 4 or 5 producers. Each one of them has their own day. This person's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. But during the show, they all stop and they all just throw in questions because they're thinking about this. There's only one of them that really did all the research for it, but all of them have ideas. And anyway, so you can do a lot to support a host there, but it is an incredibly difficult thing to do well. And most of us that host at all have spent lots of time on radio being allowed to make horrible mistakes for years before we actually started doing these. And so I think that it's worth talking about what it takes to be a host, as well as tips and tricks on how to get better at it quickly. The biggest tip is to do lots of it. That is and again, office hours. I look at office hours as a place for people to practice, for us to find new hosts, and eventually, we've been very quiet. We was brought up earlier, but as we start to promote this, we're going to want to produce more content. And what we're hoping is that we have more and more people who might be ready to host their own shows. And being on the panel, for instance, is a big piece of getting good at it. Figuring out how to get used to dancing with the conversation and being able to kind of hold the stage. So I guess I would say the first step is to figure out ways to, if you're interested in hosting, and figure out ways to be on our panel if you have the technical knowledge. Even if it's just like you get on and you answer a question or two that you have there. I mean, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed by our panel, but a lot of times that they say, well, the panel's really smart, and I don't know how. Not all of us are smarter than any one of us, so it sounds like we're smarter than we are because, David knows one thing and Kenneth knows another and John knows another and Bill knows another. And so the conglomerate makes a difference, but it's not any individual. And you can even be up there at the beginning, just watching, it's fine just to get used to what it takes to do it. But that's what it's designed for, is to provide a place for everyone to practice. And I can say that I don't know about for everybody else here, but being on every day makes me better in every meeting that I'm in, because I'm just used to thinking on my feet. I'm used to, talking about those things. But I do think that, again, you want to think about it, find ways to do it often, preferably not. I mean, podcast is not the way to learn how to be a host, in my opinion. I think that doing things live is the way to figure that out, because podcasting means that you're writing it in stone and sending it out to lots of people while you're figuring out how to do it. Go ahead, Bill.
Just a couple of things. Well, I've said before, and Alex has said before, that curiosity, real true curiosity, is, I think, one of the keys to hosting anything. You have to be interested in what other people can bring and bring that out of them. The other thing that I think is never talked about, but there's a certain quality of decisiveness. And what I mean by that is that I sometimes, if I'm doing a guest host or something like that, you just have to make a decision and do something. You can't sit there and go, well, what should I do about this? And if that's your normal decision-making pattern, is that you want to weigh everything and go back and forth for a couple of minutes before you make your opinion known, this is not the business for you, because you got to take a shot and fail or succeed. You got to do it in real time and be willing to deal with the consequences of that.
Go ahead, David.
I've talked about what I call the essential E's for streaming, for hosting, for doing a show. And for me, they are eye contact. It is so important for me to look at the people I'm working with, the talent, so they know that I care about what they're saying. The second is engaging them, making them the star that they should be, with good questions, with follow-ups. And the third thing is bringing the energy. There's a natural energy, a biological or chemical energy that exists when you're in the same space together, that doesn't exist in digital space. I started with these 3 E's, but then I actually added a 4th E, and that is to know when to end. Sometimes people just go on and on, they drag on, and I would much rather leave people wanting more than keep them longer than they need to be here.
And I fall into that trap myself. And the issue that you get into is that you lose track of time. It's why we have a count for the panelists here. We have a counter on the back end, and I'm constantly like gauging over it there, trying to go, oh, I've talked about this for 3 minutes, I should stop now. And so that's there to be conscious of that process. Or I'll look at that counter, and I will look at how many people are going to answer a question, and I go, okay, so we really need everyone to answer this in 20 seconds, or something, to not make this, or I make a decision. And this gets back to what David was talking about, or what Bill was talking about, as being decisive. As a host, you are the captain of the ship, like regardless of those things, and you have to make those decisions, and you're going to make decisions that are, what you're trying to do is create a great show. And you're going to make decisions, like, for instance, I make all kinds of decisions about, we're going to let this one run long, or I'm going to pull this one in short. So I have the control on the back end to say, I'm going to lock the question. This is not a core of what people come to watch our show for. And we could talk about it for an hour, and I'm going to shorten it to 2 people so that we just move on to the next one. So I'm crafting a show. Now, sometimes the producer is crafting that show, but in this case, the host, it really crafts that show. And then, like yesterday, we wanted to talk about Final Cut. And so I just let it run for 20, 25 minutes because I thought that it was an interesting subject for us. So those are the things that you have to do as a host, is you're going to make those decisions as you kind of pull those things together. So those are definitely, key pieces. I've told this story before, but when I first walked into Tech TV, I looked over at an intern named Kevin Rose, and I said, so do you have any tips for me? Because he had been there, and he goes, just be yourself, plus 25%. And it turns out I think about that when I give people things all the time. That's 20 years later. I'm like, people are like, what do I do? Just be yourself, plus 25%. You're just a little more, not a lot more, but just a little more than you are in person. The be yourself is also key. It's really easy for you to have a public persona that you turn on. And that is a really hard thing to maintain in an authentic way. So figuring out a way to be yourself, and then just add just a little energy to it. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
Absolutely. The first one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, when dealing with a shallow stage, what's a cost-effective setup besides gobos? Renting LCD walls in Indiana seems prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, I would definitely not put an LCD. I would say LCD or LED. LED walls on a shallow stage is a disaster. I mean, it is, because it's going to be, you're going to get all kinds of moray, you're going to have compression issues, you're going to have, there's all kinds of bad things that happen on a shallow stage with LED walls. So I definitely wouldn't do that. I would, I don't feel often the need to do too much design behind the speaker other than have it not be distracting, for the speaker as you go. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, if you're suffering with a flat wall and there's nothing else you can do but have a flat wall, the gobos will at least add a little visual distinction. And for those of you who might not be familiar with stage terminology, gobo's a pattern projector, a pattern that goes over a light and projects a model or leaves or whatever behind a wall. The other thing, though, is that fabric and art and things to hang on the wall, even if you have a flat space, to just provide some visual zones. And then you get into design and how to do that. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but to add something to break up just a flat background, unless you're going to go in the direction Alex has, which is, a specific look of flatness so that people are concentrated on you. There's nothing wrong with that.
So I'm going to read you something that's useful for the stage, and it's also useful for hosts. I don't read things out of books very often, but I have a lot of books. This is actually from Zen and the Japanese Culture by D.T. Suzuki, and it was written, 50 years ago or something like that. But he talked about samurai, and my book is actually broken in this part because it sits next to my desk and I read it every once in a while so that I can keep this in my mind, because it is probably the most important passage that I've had in a philosophical book, not a religious text, but a philosophical book that I've read in almost ever. So, an idea, however worthy and desirable in itself, becomes a disease when the mind is obsessed with it. The disease or obsessions the swordsman has to get rid of are: 1, the desire for victory; 2, the desire to resort to technical cunning; 3, the desire to display all that he has learned; 4, the desire to overawe the enemy; 5, the desire to play a passive role; and lastly, 6, the desire to get rid of whatever disease he is likely to be infected with. When any one of those obsesses him, he becomes its slave, and as it makes him lose all freedom he has entitled to the swordsman. That is what I think about all the time. When you're trying to do a host, it's so easy to do something really cool. That's the technical cunning. It's easy to try to be impressive. That's to overawe the enemy. It's also to be passive and not cut in, not do the things that you need to do. And then you get caught up in trying to get rid of these, and it becomes, those are the things that are there. But it's a really powerful passage for me because it is the key to many things, but the key to hosting. And when you think about staging, and when you think about the set, like if you look at the set we're doing with our test stuff, just curtains, stitch them up and pull them up, looks gorgeous. Are we going to put another set in? Absolutely. But we don't need to do that right now. I don't know what I want to do. I want to keep it fluid while I figure this stuff out. And so being patient in that area is what I'd recommend there. But be careful. I think the biggest problem I see with people with stages when they have hosts up there is they look like they try too hard. Like you either end up with a conversation between two ferns, or you end up with things that just look like you kind of put them up. And unless you really think it out, I'd rather have a black curtain or a gray curtain with lights. Like if you look at what we did again with our test stage, it's just gray curtains. The reason we use gray curtains is because we can light them. We can put up nice up lights and change. I can make that color be anything I want it to be, or anything, not anything I want it to be, anything Tlaloc wants it to be. But having great lights with some gray curtains is really valuable. Next question.
Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn has the next one, and they're asking, how much time should a host split between sharing opinions, personality, asking audience questions, versus allowing talent or the topic to take center stage?
Go ahead, David.
My approach to this is that my job is to make the talent look good and to make sure that we're sharing meaningful, engaging, thoughtful content to the watchers, so to the viewers. And so anytime I'm sharing my own opinion, I find myself very often interviewing rabbis, and I'm a rabbi, so I have what to say also. But in that situation, I'm not really a rabbi, I'm a host. And so anything that I do want to share is going to be in the service of allowing the talent to comment, to offer insight. I'm always trying to offer something to give them space to then offer and present. And the same thing goes with questions, I think. I'm going to share audience questions that are going to allow the talent rather to expound, to teach, to inspire, to do all of that work.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Also, it just depends on where things are going. And I keep going back. Last year, I think it was it New Year's? Anderson Cooper had a big thing that he was going to do on CNN. Huge live show. It was supposed to last 2 or 3 hours, and it got rained out. Literally, the whole thing was a deluge. He had to stretch for 3 hours, and it's fascinating to watch how he did that. It's the first time I have ever seen him reveal more about himself, because he literally had to create content on the fly for huge periods of time. He had a young woman as a co-host with him. It went to occasionally, but he knew, you could just see, he knew, this is my job. This is what I've been preparing for my whole career. Can I stretch for 3 hours? And he did it magnificently. His producers got some people rambled in, hurried up, and got a few interviews there to break the monotony. But he really had to pedal that bicycle really hard for 3 hours. It's a masterclass in doing that.
Yeah, one of the things about host is definitely being able to just stretch. You'll see this. Someone will be on the other side of the camera going like this. I need you to stretch. That means we're not ready for you yet. We need to, or we'll tell you, hey, you got to cover 15 minutes. You'll hear in your ear, you got to cover 15 minutes or 20 minutes, or you got to stretch for another 3 minutes, whatever that is. The funny thing is that also comes down to being able to think on your feet. That's again why I recommend being on, whether it's this show or some other show, being on panels, is getting used to being able to talk, getting used to being able to expound, getting and do it in an intelligent way. And there's so hard to just do it. You can read about playing baseball, you can read about singing or playing the guitar, you can read about playing football or soccer or whatever thing that you want to do. But it is very different once you're out there, and you have to practice. There is the only way to get good at hosting, and the only way to get good at meetings, and the only way is to practice. And remember that you're always trying to make yourself better. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And so you want to be able to find a place where there's a lot of people that are going to push you to get better at what you do. And so I think that is, it's really important. We did one of the jokes internally. We did a show with Soledad O'Brien, who is, amazingly good at what she does. And we had to show her, actually it was a question, the question engine. We had to run over and show her something. And our producer ran over, was very nervous, and because there's only we were less than a minute out before the show to show her something. And Soledad looked over and she goes, "Calm down, honey. We got 30 seconds." It was like we have an eternity. Don't worry about this, and it was just a funny term that we say it all the time now when we're like 30 seconds. Like, calm down. We got 30 seconds. And so but that being able to mentally push out what we call the horizon of events. So when you're in a host, any production, you think about horizon of events. That means when you see something coming versus when it gets to you. Most of us, when we start, we'll refer to it as, if you see someone overwhelmed in a show and things are falling apart, you're like, they're in their horizon. That means they're right here. Things are happening as fast as they can, and they're just responding. And oftentimes they're behind their horizon of events, which means that things have already happened and they're just trying to hang on, and the further you can push that horizon of events away as a host, and as technical, when we do rehearsals, when we do preparations, when we do all those things, that's pushing our horizon of events away, seeing things that are wrong, trying to figure those out. And as a host, you really want to, a lot of times we end up with beginner hosts that don't want to rehearse. They just want to show up and do their thing. And they just don't realize that it puts them in a position of failure, and it makes them look bad to do that. And you can always tell the good hosts, they're like, when are we going to rehearse, and how do we prep, and can you send me these things? And they push because they want to make sure that they're ready. Go ahead, David.
One of the greatest gifts about office hours for us panelists is that we get to see all the questions ahead of time. We have time to prepare our thoughts, our answers, and that doesn't always happen in a live show. So what I would do if I were a host is I would make sure before I go into that situation that I prep myself. If no one else is going to give me questions, if no one else is going to give me filler, I would create for myself so that I have things in my back pocket that I can always pull out and ask or offer in order to that fill.
Absolutely, Kenneth.
I think that's exactly right. Preparation beats everything else. And when you're the show host, you really have to be prepared to run the entire length of the show with nobody on screen but you. If all else fails, you've still got a show to do. Preparation is a wonderful thing. As far as how much time you split to which question or which part, that depends on why you're there. If your talent is talking about a book, you're going to talk about a book. If you have some questions that you need to have answered yourself, it's good to work those in somehow. But if you don't have a particular way to lead by questions, you can always make yourself the first person in the first row of the audience and ask the questions that you're interested in knowing, and then listen to those answers so that you have some follow-up to do. Don't just work from a list of questions.
Yeah. I saw this somewhere, and I don't remember where I saw it, but I think about it a lot. Is the best present you can give to people around you is to be present. and it is, and I saw that on some bumper sticker or someone on Twitter post. I don't remember where it came from, but I think about that. Like, I'm good at meetings, and one of the reasons is that I'm very present. Now, I'm not very good at taking notes. so usually there's someone in the meeting with me to take the notes because I won't remember anything I said. Like, people say, well, we talked about it in office hours. I'm like, I don't remember anything about office hours. Like, I am in the moment all the time about it. And then when I stop, I go to work, and I don't think about it again until the next day. And so when I'm in every meeting, I'm present. Like, I'm not checking email. I'm not working on something else. I'm not doing other things. As a host or even in a meeting, I tend to be 100% in what I'm doing, and then I move on to the next thing that I'm 100% into. And I think that as a host, you have to be that way. It is almost impossible to host a show or an event, and really, it's hard to be on the panel, but it's almost impossible to be a host if you're not just in it. You're not trying to do a bunch of other things. You're not trying to do a lot of people will notice here. Like, I'm the worst as a panelist because when Liberty's hosting, everyone gets notes. You see all those notes in the panel thing because I'm in the background going, don't do that. I don't do that when I'm posting because I don't have time to do that. So anyway, so thinking about that, the best advice that I have about being a host with other people is that it's about them. Like, even here, you'll always know if I answer a question first, that means that no one raised their hand in the back end. That's the only time I do that. Otherwise, I try to let everybody else answer first, or everyone, and I might interject something. And then at the end, my goal is to never say anything, just move on to the next question. But if I feel like I just need to wrap it up a little bit as the host, I make that kind of like, I'm going to pull this together to add a little value for the folks. Or if I feel like we hit close to the target, but not right on it, I'll tap on that center of the target there for people. But the other thing is that the best thing to look at as a host is that a lot of hosts are ADD. You should see a whole bunch of hosts sit down at a dinner in Vegas. It's just this crazy, everybody's talking about something because they get bored before the audience does. That's why they're good hosts. They cut. The key is that when someone's not telling you if someone's not really telling you what needs to be said, as a host, your job is to gently pull it out of them. If they're talking too much, your job is to cut them off. And so as the moderator or host, your job is to meld that together because they're not conscious to it. They're just thinking about what they're thinking about. And so you have to guide them through that process of cutting them off or extending it out. Next question.
Next one comes from David Brady in New York City. And David says, reading here last week led to a guest host stint on the Zoom test kitchen last Friday. It was a late ask and I didn't have enough prep time. What are some tips for riffing and keeping the show going? And he's got a link there to it.
I haven't seen it yet. No, I didn't see it coming in, but the big thing is that I have a pile of things that I can show. Usually, if we're going to talk about something, I have a pile of things. I don't do a lot of presentations. I do it every once in a while when I have something very specific I want to kind of step through. But a lot of times I have it, and you'll see that I have things open. Like I go to my photos library, and I have folders of things that I think are interesting, so that I'm always running back to those. But having just kind of a pile of folders out there that you can kind of throw in there and talk about. And then I'm surrounded by, gear. Like you can't see it here, but I have gear all around me. That's why I can just reach over and grab something and reach over and grab something else and show it. So everything's almost in arm's length for me. And that helps a lot for me to be able to kind of dance with whatever I'm going to do. And if I'm going to show up and talk about a certain subject, I'll grab a bunch of things and set them on the table right here so that I don't know if I'll go to them. I don't want to feel like I have to, but I have them at arm's reach so I can grab onto them if I'm going to talk about them. Go ahead, Bill.
For me, it's desperately important to have at least a little outline of a couple of things ahead that I keep over to the side of my monitor that I can look at and go, yeah, I should kind of pivot to that. It was interesting. Alex was, as famously just the day before yesterday, was a little tiny bit late, and I was sitting there watching the countdown clock go, and I realized that I had not given any thought whatsoever to what happens if Alex is delayed any farther than that. Now, normally as a reader in our structure, I'm supposed to step in and do that. So I thought, oh God, I have to do this. And it was the most uncomfortable thing in the world to dive in. I knew the first paragraph I was going to say. And then I remember really distinctly my brain going, oh, I've got to read the question. And now I'm doing both sides and that's wrong. So should I ask somebody else? And I was in the middle of this loop that I had not pre-thought out when Alex showed up and saved my life, because I just really wasn't mentally in my flow at all for that day.
We never noticed a part of that. Not at all.
Well, the funny thing is that's why in the early days, people would ask me something or say something right before I went on, and I'd get very perturbed with folks for doing that, of telling me something that something's wrong that I can't fix, or asking me something beforehand. I'd be like, don't do that right now. I'm about to go live. It's because I'm mentally stacking a bunch of things up in my head. Like I've got a box. And if you do that, you just pushed all the boxes off the table. And now I'm like, I don't know what to do. And you saw me melt down when Liberty dropped out and handed it to Bill. And I didn't know that. I was like, I don't understand why Liberty's still here, but Bill's asking the question. And you saw me, I just completely lost my train of thought. Like I was like, so as far as taking care of host, you also have to create, and as a host, you have to also kind of request things. Like you seem like a prima donna sometimes when you request things, but if you're going to host, I need the information that I need. I also need a place that I can get ready. I need a place that I can check my computer. I need food. I need water. I need those things, especially when you're in person. You need to make sure that you're taking care of those processes that make a difference. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tyler Sunderhouse in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Tyler says, when hosting a show, is there a difference between hosting a live broadcast versus an in-person show?
Go ahead, David.
By the way, Taylor, great questions that you're putting in here. I would argue that there is. Here, if I'm hosting something, I've got, 12 screens around me. I can pull up tons of information. I've got Discord running. I've got Chrome running. I've got, all this different, and I can access that information at the push of a button, which is fantastic. So on the live broadcast side, you have to have both the tech and some technical awareness to know how to manage all of those different systems. When you're up on a stage, you don't have any of that. You may have some note cards or an iPad. And so I think that the challenge in that situation is equally difficult, but in a very different way. You have to come, I think, prepared differently because you won't have access at your fingertips to all that, the various types of information that you might have in a live broadcast.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
And I think this goes back to Alex's plenty of discussions about the why hybrid is so difficult. Are you there to serve this human audience in front of you, or are you there to serve the audience, the wider audience, usually bigger audience, that's watching locally? And it's very, very difficult to switch your mind back and forth between those two things and serve both of them well. In fact, I'd almost argue it's impossible to really do as good a job of serving two masters as it is to do one.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I do when I'm in person, which I don't do very much anymore, but I've done hundreds of them when I've been in person, is that I really am looking at every person. So when I'm in a room, I will be looking at people. I'm not looking out at the room. I'm looking at individuals and making eye contact. What's funny is I usually make eye contact with people that are nodding. Nodding is a really powerful tool as an audience member, is that I'll look at you because especially if I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go next. I do look at people who aren't interested and try to figure out how to make them interested, or how to persuade them to come and look at what I'm doing. And I primarily look at people who are nodding because I feel like I'm getting to them. I'm reaching them, And so the other thing I look at is, when I'm in person, when you're doing it online, we can see a little, but all of us are kind of on here and so I just assume that everybody's, doing whatever they're doing on the other end. When I'm in person, I'm looking at blink rate. So I'm constantly looking at how much people blink. And if they start blinking long blinks, so people used to think that I was ADD, I am ADD, but people used to think that I was like just jumping off. But when I tell a story or a joke or I do something goofy, it's because people are blinking slowly. It means that they're saturating. Either I'm giving them too much information, I'm not giving it to them in an interesting way, it's too warm in the room. There's a whole bunch of things that happen there. But I will back up and I can see it in the audience. And then I shift gears for a little while to get them laughing or to give them a breath, and then I go back to what I was doing. And so I do that a lot as far as that. And then again, the one thing that is the same is that I've given up on long lectures. So generally, I will do Q&A at least half of my presentation, if not. And then the other thing is, I guess, in person. Again, when we do it here, and I have a telestrator and I can do lots of other things, I tend to not have slide decks. I just tend to throw things up as I'm talking. When I'm in front of people, I tend to have slide decks and I work on them. I mean, me being up there for 30 minutes with a slide deck is 2 weeks of me doing stuff. Like I'm collecting. I did one on the last one I think I did live was one on TikTok for Justine's university, blogging or vlogging university. And it's just so many hours of finding everything, putting it together, figuring out the story, figuring out the thread, figuring out and then getting rid of, I have almost no text on my slides. And so it's just figuring out what I'm going to say over top of those and then running through it over and over and over again. Next question.
Taylor Sunderhouse in Cincinnati, Ohio asks, when you are the host of a live show, what are the best practices for controlling a guest? For example, the guest is rambling or going off topic.
Go ahead, David.
I'm always aware to not embarrass the guest. I want to rein them in, but I also don't want to do it through embarrassment. So often what I'll do is I'll jump in with great excitement and say, oh, you just made me think of X, or let me ask you more about that. And so I can subtly sort of shift the conversation or move them away. Or I might also say something like, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I saw a question from the audience that connects directly to what you're saying.
Right.
So that way I'm able to cut them off and still make them feel like they're doing everything right.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
And another technique, if you're prepared for it ahead of time, is to say, let's do a lightning round. I'm going to ask you a series of 5 questions. Give me the most succinct answer you have and see if that breaks through and gives them an idea that the pace needs to be a little faster. There's only so much you can do. The other thing is that occasionally the first time you have a guest on, maybe it's not a good idea to have just that guest. Maybe it's a good idea, if you don't know how they're going to perform, to have 2 or 3 guests. So if that one continues to run on, you can direct the conversation to other people who are more concise.
And you just have to, you're also looking for gaps. You're looking for them to literally take a breath and you just immediately jump in. Like you just, they're talking, and some people are hard because they'll just talk a mile a minute and they won't talk, they won't stop, but if they just take a breath to think about something and you immediately go to the next question or jump to the next person, but you're looking for this gap to jump in and curve it off. The hardest part is when you have, it's not guests, it's when you have the audience. That's why Makana exists, is because I don't like, Makana, the very first version of Makana was not designed for online. It was designed for in the room to get rid of those darn mics. So the mics, the worst thing to do in an in-room thing is to have a mic on a stand, because you have no control over it. The second worst thing to do is to hand somebody the mic. So, to let them have control of your show. And then what we typically do is, if we're going to have people ask questions, and we try to avoid it, but if they really want to ask questions, we have mic runners, and those mic runners are told the only thing that I care about is that you do not let go of the mic. do not let, and we build our seats so that they can, literally the seat structures and where the rows are is so that a mic runner can reach in and hand it to the person. So it's usually 4 is the max, 4 on each side of the piece there. I'm sorry, 4 on, it's 8 total inside of a row. Is usually where I like to max out, because otherwise I have to pass the mic down, right? And I can usually get over 4, and 6 is better, but anyway, it's a whole other story. But the point is that, and then usually we give our hosts a signal like this, like just, it'll be like, they'll just go like this. If you scratch your ear, we'll pull the mic. like we're just gonna pull it, and it's like, okay, I'm done with that person, it's some signal like this of just like, that's not obvious, but it's just them doing something, and it'll look like a nervous habit that the speaker has, but it's telling our mic runners to pull the mic, like get them out of there, because 9 times out of 10, someone's going to ramble on, and the guests, someone in the audience will ramble on. You got to figure out a way to cut them off. Next question.
Taylor Sunderhouse, Cincinnati, back again with another good one. As a host, how do you encourage your guests to get involved in the show if they are quiet?
Go ahead, David.
So sometimes you have guests who won't stop talking, and other times you have guests who don't talk enough. My approach to this is to ask very specific, pointed questions, and also for those questions to be more about, I'm not sure how to describe this, but how they feel. So what do you think about? Or how do you feel about X, Y, and Z, as opposed to, can you tell me how this works? As opposed to a technical question where they may feel stressed because they don't have that information at the tip of their tongue. If I ask them to emote a little bit, to share their feelings or their thoughts on something, then that's perhaps a more comfortable place for them to begin. But calling on them and asking very specific, pointed questions to draw them into the conversation.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
And I'm not above having a couple of plants in the audience in this respect. I'd like to be able to say, if nobody stands up and asks the first question, Jane, we were talking about this beforehand, and you had a really interesting point. Can you share that with everyone? And then somebody will run a mic out to Jane, and Jane will have that. And, you know who Jane is, and she can speak intelligently on this topic. And then maybe you have someone to go to from there, so that this idea of back and forth becomes more natural. And it's not, sometimes the hardest thing to do is get the first dam broken. And I've seen this over and over again, even at things like funerals, where somebody walks up and they say, let's now come and talk about the person who has passed. And the first one comes up there and they're just frozen. And they can stand for a minute and a half and not say anything because they're uncomfortable in that venue.
Yeah, and I think that it also has to do with a lot of studying. If I'm interviewing someone, I try to read a lot about what they do and what they're interested in, what they've written about, what they've posted. If they have anything on video, you want to look at it. What gets them excited? And again, I often talk to hosts about, like, what do you want to talk about? Like, they're not guests. What do you want to talk about? And I'm going to ask, especially at the very beginning, I'm definitely going to ask them what they want to talk about, and because it's just, that's going to loosen everything up, get them going, and get things moving. Talking a lot about things they don't want to talk about has them kind of shift off and start thinking about something else. Then it's really hard to hang on to them. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California says, did anyone see our NYK Cyber Rodeo stream? I think the host did an excellent job for 6.5 hours.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was peripherally involved in that, and I thought they did an excellent job too. It was really interesting. I think, I didn't hear this specifically, but I think they were a father and son team. So they were very comfortable with talking to each other. They've been doing that their whole life. And so they were super fluid at just continuing to have a back and forth, and there was two of them there so that one person didn't have to do the whole thing. Sometimes a team hosting circumstance, if you've got a long one, can be very powerful to take the burden off of one human.
Oh, we love to have multiple hosts for especially long ones. You got to give people even just time to do bio breaks. Go ahead, John.
Been watching Now channel for a long time, and it's father and son team. They're fantastic. And it's good to know, because a lot of those guys that are YouTubers don't do great live performances. These guys killed it, and props to Noah and his team for pulling out, guys.
To give you a sense of how hard live is, we've had YouTubers where a company brings us in to do, and there's the YouTubers, and we've been doing live, and they have to do live for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And we've gotten many times 10 or 15 minutes into it, and the YouTubers are like, you got to turn this off. I can't. Like, they just get flustered that they have to keep on coming up with something live. They're used to little bits of a minute here and 30 seconds there and 15 seconds there. They're not used to just talking, and they just get flustered and overwhelmed because they're not used to it. So when people say, oh, they're a YouTube star, they'll be a great host, I'm like, have you ever seen them do live? Like, I'd like to know if they're, and I'm not like, just, do you know that they're good? Because I'm not sure. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, many electronic musicians, he says, built their entire shows on the fly. Could the same methods be used in verbal communication, building a set of mental modules that fit together and be useful for music?
Go ahead, David.
Douglas, I can't speak to the last part, being useful for music, but your question is actually very, very interesting to me. When I give sermons to congregants, I can't stand reading something that I've written ahead of time off of a teleprompter. It feels dry. It feels boring. Written language is a completely different monster than spoken language. And so what I often do is I'll what are my main bullet points? What are the things that I want to cover? And then I will just put it together on the fly. And my personal experience is that what I offer is much more powerful and much more engaging when I do that. Having said all of that, I think that being able to speak on the fly, being able to host on the fly is a real skill. And I don't think that everyone can do it. I think, as Alex, you were just saying, I think many people will just get flustered with how much time they have to fill.
And again, a lot of this comes from practice. This is a muscle. This is like a dance, and understanding the dance moves and understanding what those are to do it on the fly. When someone's doing an electronic musician, they're not experimenting. Sometimes they're experimenting on the fly, but they're experimenting based on a lot of experience. When I turn this, I have a pretty good idea what's going to happen next. And I have an idea of what that's going to look like. And I have an idea what that's going to look like. I don't, like when I go to different people in the panel, I have a pretty good sense of at least how they're going to respond to this, and so, you're mixing up those ingredients. But again, what it comes from, a lot of experience. And so again, finding places to do that, whether you're a guest on some other show, being a panelist on this show, you just need to practice. It's just that is the key to all of these things. When you look at any great musician, you're looking at thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours of practice. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, hosting a show, ebb and flow is one of the hardest things to get people to understand when hosting, and familiarity or structure seems to be the only two ways to achieve smoothness. Is there a third way?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, you talk about ebb and flow, and I will say that when you look at that term, it's the opposite of monotone, and monotone is one of the things that is the most energy sucking out of a presentation. If someone just drones at the same level, they don't vary pitch, or they don't vary cadence, or they don't vary anything else, it's like taking a sleeping tablet. So ebb and flow inside all sorts of structure, I think, is very important. I think people who craft whole shows do nothing but think about where are the emotional peaks, where are the valleys to let people rest afterwards. So in any live show, I think you have to be cognizant of that. I will say, Alex was mentioning that be yourself plus 25, and I wholly agree with that. You have to amp yourself up a little bit, because if you just schlub on and, aren't really feeling engaged and active in things, people will stop listening to you. I mean, it's like you're not into it, so they're not into it. So I think that is critical, and part of that is managing the energy through this course of the cycle. It's a little dull, I need to bring it up, or it's getting out of hand, I need to bring it down. That's part of the host's role.
Yeah, absolutely. Excitement and fun. I guess what I would say is also being fun. Like it really, you want to find a way. Like I think I might have told this story before, but I had a talk in front of 1,500 people about After Effects at 8:30 in the morning. Second day on a conference down in LA or whatever. And it was, I was like, this is going to be horrible. Like everyone's going to be falling asleep. And I had the week before I had been in a car accident, nothing major, just fender bender, but I had broken my titanium laptop. And so I had replaced it and everything else, but it was dead. Like there's nothing to be done about it. So I pulled out the laptop as I ran up, and as I got to the top step, I almost tripped by faked tripping and let go of the laptop, and it flew like 15 feet in front of me and about 8 feet high, and landed, and just pieces of it went everywhere. And the whole audience, because I looked like I just tripped and let it go, and you hear the whole audience go, and then when it hit, it was like, whoa, like everyone was just like, and I pulled out another laptop. I said, that's why we have backups. When I opened it up and did the show. But what I admittedly, it was completely I'm going to shock everybody with adrenaline, and there'll be a wait for at least the next 20 minutes. And now I'll have to, by then, hopefully I'll be in it, but trying to figure something out that I could, start the show with, and finding ways to do that is, but excitement and something that people don't expect. If you have masterclass, watch Steve Martin's thing about comedy, because there are so many places that you can use some of his things. One of the things is taking people down. A lot of comedy is I'm going to take you down to a place where you expect me to go one place, and I'm going to suddenly go the other, in a funny way. And doing that as a speaker is something that's super useful. Go ahead, David.
As you were speaking, you made me think about some of the interviews that happen, the one-on-one interviews with political candidates on CNN, for example, where they'll have two chairs, higher chairs up on the dais, and sometimes they'll sit, and every once in a while, the questioner, the host, will stand up, and then the politician will stand up, and whether they're standing or sitting, which is why I just stood up. I just lifted my desk.
I'm not going to stand up. Just letting you know, I'm not going to.
That's okay, but it does. It changes the energy in the room also. Yeah. And so you made me think of that there are times when going from standing to sitting or sitting to standing can help with the engagement level.
Yeah. And I use content a lot too. Like, let's watch a movie. let's watch something. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, what icebreakers for hosts seem to work well in virtual via Zoom versus in person?
I'd say the both thing is get people to talk about themselves. In all conversations, the most powerful thing is to have people talk about themselves. They love that. And so you always ask them, what do you do? Why do you do it? Like, you're asking them questions, and getting them to talk. And that's the easiest way to get things flowing, in my opinion, everywhere in the world. Go ahead, Bill.
Plus one on that. You know what doesn't work for me, and I'm bad at it anyway, is joke telling in the virtual world for some reason. Because unless you have an actual audience feeding back, something like the panel we have here, to tell a joke into the void, I have no idea whether it's landing or totally failing. I just think don't even go there.
You go, David.
In my part of the world, we play Jewish geography, which is when you get the guests to find the connections that they share in common. So I used to live here, or I went to that school, or I know that person. And so it's not just about the individuals in the room, but about the connections that are able to be made amongst those individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Sometimes a show's anchor role is distorted by being given the title of host. I see the host as the center of a show versus an anchor who fills a portion of the show. What are the other distinctions that these roles might embody?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes they're very close together. I would say that an anchor oftentimes is kind of managing the flow of where things are going, and oftentimes a hand of the producer. Of trying to get things moving. And a host is more of someone who's integrally controlled, like really connected to that content, and really, guiding the content as it goes through. So I think that would be the distinction that I would make. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think of the anchor as the traffic manager a little bit more, and a host as someone who is there to add an emotional tenor to things. I'm not saying that is strict or it always needs to be that way. Also, the filter between the back end, I mean, most hosts or anchors have an IFB or something, and there are other people working behind the scenes to create content and let that host know how to pivot left, pivot right, whether there's something coming up, whether you need to stretch, and the rest of that. So that multi-channel thing, whoever's on screen tends to be the end of the filter line. We've given you all the filtered information we can. Your job is to present that in the absolute best way you can to keep the audience engaged with it. But this stuff is going to be coming into you, and sometimes that's a lot harder than it looks from somebody who's watching the feed from the outside.
Next question.
Next one comes from Brandon Buttram in Indianapolis, Indiana. Have you ever had to hang up on a guest or abruptly end a show or interview? And if so, how did it go?
So much easier to do in Zoom. Yeah, we were helping a local council do their shows. And this was a year ago, I think. And they have a 3-minute comment, 3 minute per person or 2 minute per person, I don't know what it was, comment thing. And you never get to do that in physical world. People just stand up there on the mic and they're just going to keep on talking. And then you have to send security over. Then you have to do all these other things. And this person was upset about something. I don't remember what the subject matter was. I pay so much attention to what we're doing. I don't really care what people are talking about. And so I'm working on it. And someone from the council says, can we just kick this person out of the Zoom? And I was like, oh yeah. And they're like, let's do that. And they were like, cause they were like at 4 minutes or on 2 minute or something like that. And I just went, and they were just gone. And the council looked out and said, it's 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. I don't remember which way it was, 2 or 3, but they said, you really need to keep it inside of that there. And after that, everybody's, tightening up their angry comments. But the funny thing is the person from that council looked at me and said, we are never going back to physical. Like we are never going to do that again. And the idea that they could just make it go away and hold the line on what they had them like not interested in doing this. And they still to this day, I won't mention who they are, but they still to this day do them all virtual so that they can be more accessible to the rest of the community. But they're doing it because they can control the time. Go ahead, Bill.
I also wanted to note that I remember hearing one of the people at the National Speakers Association talk at length about what happens when an audience member really just wants to get up and pontificate instead of a question. And he told the story of somebody who had done that, and he had this technical point and that technical point, and why am I not right? And, should I do that? And ended on a question like that. And instead of engaging at all, the speaker just says, interesting. Next question. And it's so easy to re-engage and make it just bigger than it should have been.
It is. You're absolutely right that there are many times when I've just gone next question, or I say, great, or thank you for that. Or, and we try not to use it. In seminars that I worked on for a long time in 20, 30 years ago, there was a saying that we would say to people that was not, it was kind of coded as, you're crazy, which was thank you for sharing. It was like, so we said, thank you for, it was used a lot in the seminars, but thank you for sharing. But when we said it to each other personally, it meant, you just went off the rails and, thank you for sharing, but oftentimes thank you for sharing is a great way to just say, okay, we're done. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael. He says, I've heard plenty of stories of concerts turning acoustic after backline system failure. What skills are needed by musicians to do that? And how can songs be written to strip down well?
I'll go with David.
I don't know how to do this well, but I just wanted to share with you, an amazing group called Walk Off the Earth. They use everything you can imagine, coffee cans, spoons, everything you can imagine to create their music. And so any of theirs, even though when they do a concert, they're using a full, band and all that other stuff, they could literally play any of their songs unplugged. And it's so much fun to watch.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think I mentioned this before, but I was in the audience for a Loggins and Messina concert many, many years ago at Grady Gamage Auditorium in Arizona. And somebody hit a transformer in their car outside and the whole place went pitch dark. And I mentioned this was before all the safety lighting and things like that. So it went pitch dark. You couldn't see your hands in front of your face. Yeah. And they brought some flashlights out, stage hands, and they eventually set up on the front of the stage. And they said, well, we've heard the acoustics in here are really great, so we're just going to try this. And it was somewhat quiet, but the acoustics were really good. When they fixed the problem and the lights came on, I still can hear the groan from the audience about, we've lost this moment of absolute specialness that was intimate and quiet and that nobody else has gotten. And now we're pumping up the amplifiers and we're going back to a regular concert, which will be great, but not the same thing. So good musicianship, that's what it needs.
Well, and a lot of these musicians are playing with it on their guitar. They're playing with it acoustically. They don't have the big stage all the time. So when they're noodling around, they usually have an acoustic version of many of their songs that's around because that's how they wrote it. That's how they fiddle with it. That's how they, that type of thing. We were in a show where it was raining a lot, and the water, there was an awning that went over the mixer, and the awning kept on getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And we kept on watching this awning from the backstage. We were watching this awning with Dave Matthews, and awning got thicker and thicker and thicker. And then it just burst and just literally put, I don't know, 1,000 gallons of water onto their Digico. And that was it. The end of the show. That was it. And they figured out some way to backline it so that Dave Matthews could come out with a mic, with an SM58 and figure out how to get a direct out of his guitar, or maybe they even put another SM58 in front of it. And it was like nothing. And he sat there in front of tens of thousands of people and played, all the songs we know. Like he didn't experiment. These are like, this isn't a new song I'm working on. Like he went into, I'm going to play every song that that from me, and I'm going to play it acoustically by myself. And it's the best Dave Matthews show I've ever seen, and one of the best shows I've ever seen. Like it was just magical. Like it was like what Bill was saying. And that's when I started designing what I'm working on now, which is that what people really want is that intimate experience, with the artist, not necessarily we do a big show so that we can make lots of money because we have to fill 70,000 seats. So how do you make it interesting for the people in the back? Because they're paying a lot of money for this. And, but those intimate shows are just amazing. And so, but a lot of them, again, a lot of these artists have a version of their songs that they play with for many of those songs that they can do. But they aren't riffing. I mean, most of the time when they do that, they've done those together a lot to figure it out. I saw the Violent Femmes play with the drummer was playing on cardboard boxes, and they were playing acoustic for like 50 of us, and it was it's pretty cool. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has our last one today. He says, what verbal or nonverbal cues can a host give to guide panelists, and when are these appropriate?
The most important verbal cue for a host is nodding. And you'll see me nod fairly often. If I want people to keep talking, I'm going to keep nodding. Like, oh, you're going down the right path. That's me telling. And you'll see people who do a lot of hosting, especially on Zoom, but nodding is a huge positive reinforcement for the viewer. If you stop nodding, they sometimes will feel that, like, okay, and crossing your arms is a good one to say, okay, you're going up against something. And then sometimes I'll furrow my eyes just a little bit, and it's not that it tells them something. It mostly just makes them feel uncomfortable talking about whatever, what's behind me, like kind of thing. And so I definitely use those in discussions. Go ahead, Bill.
Supporting that thought 150%. When I used to do a lot of on-camera interviews, when I didn't show, I would bob around like an idiot trying to keep the energy up for the person I was interviewing. And so it would be,
yeah. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is we see this all the time in interviews. It's not so much hosting, but interviews. They'll interview someone and then they're looking down at the next question. You're killing that person. Like, you are just on their presentation, and you don't understand why they're not, like, you need to look at them when you ask the question, and when they're talking, they're in a fragile state. They're talking about something that they care about, and you're looking down, or you're looking at something else, or you're looking at the next notes, or you're looking at whatever. And that's why I build a support system around this, so that I don't have to do anything, so that I'm not looking away. That's one of the most key, and we're going to come back to being present, of just getting things out of the way so that you can be with other people, is what's going to make a better show. I wasn't sure if we could do an hour, but we could. I was like, well, we'll see how it goes. Then we didn't have a ton of people showing up. I was like, yeah, but really, really great questions. Our producers just did a fantastic job of sussing that out, and really great panel. So really great answers to it. It was great. This is definitely one to watch again. It's a lot of good coverage here. So thanks to our panelists. We can't do this without you. Thanks to the producers for all the great questions. And now we're going to go into after hours, I think. Let's see how long it takes for this to come up. Remember that Lois has got a show this afternoon. We'll send out an announcement.
What's it about?
I think it's about birds. I think.
It's for the birds?
It's not for the birds. It's about the birds.
Oh.
Not for the birds.
Sorry.